All right, guys, welcome back to Everything College Bowl podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be dissecting 5 potential transfer destinations for Tennessee quarterback Nico Iamaleava, who is deciding to enter the spring transfer portal. A big developing story here in CFB that just came apart in the last couple of days. We're going to talk about how we got here, and then we're going to go ahead and look at some of those destinations. So if you'd like to skip to that, the timestamp will be below. Looking at where this thing's got started, Nick, just a couple of days ago, midweek, rumors were swirling that Nico and Tennessee were in active negotiations regarding his NIL money. And then on Friday, Nico skipped practice entirely, enabling a bit of a holdout that seems very short-lived. As a Saturday morning, Josh Heupel informed the team that they were moving on, and it appears Nico informed offensive coordinator Joey Hazel Friday night that he was going to enter the transfer portal. So something that went from just some rumors on Thursday, Nick, to quickly developing into a major story in college football. Portal opens up on April 16th. This is massive because a lot of people have thought that college football would potentially be ruined by, behavior like this, and it seems like it's now coming full circle. This doesn't even compare to the Matthew Sluka situation last year, Nick. This is a legitimate high-end talent who's leaving a team that badly needs a starting quarterback because now they're kind of left in limbo, and a guy who, in the middle of the offseason is looking to go elsewhere, all because of money. It's purely down to contract situations entirely. There's nothing else to do with it here, and this is certainly a very bad look for Nico. Something that's going to certainly have a long-lasting effect, I'd say, on his career, and it's a tough break for Tennessee as well. This is the blue chip prospect they snagged 2 years ago. This was supposed to be a multi-year starter in this program, one they invested a lot of time and, of course, money into, but they weren't willing to budge on giving him any more money, especially after a bit of a subpar season from him in his first year as a starter. So it certainly puts Tennessee in a tough position, but one that we can certainly respect, that they weren't going to put up with any nonsense and a guy that was demanding more money that he certainly didn't earn. And it results in Tennessee going ahead and cutting ties with Iamaleava. Nick, I just want to kind of get your thoughts on this interesting situation, one of a kind so far in college football in the NIL era.
What an incredible turn of events over the last 72 hours. I can't believe we've got here, but at the same time, it makes total sense that we got here. When these rumors started midweek, Wednesday, Thursday, I reached out to you, Dalton, and I said, wow, did you see this? And you were saying, oh, that's just rumors. I bet you they're just going to pony up the money. There's nothing to it. But I thought there was some smoke to the fire, but I didn't think this would turn out the way it did. Tennessee cuts bait. They move on. Probably the right decision. I mean, you can't have a guy like that in your locker room, in my opinion. So that begs the question about who wants to add a guy like this in your locker room. Getting paid, I think it was $2.4 million this season, part of his current contract. His camp wanted $4 million, which is a crazy raise, in my opinion. I don't think he's a $4 million quarterback. But Tennessee's in a tough spot here because now they got to make a decision about who's going to start at quarterback for them, or are they going to go try and chase somebody in the spring portal? This musical chairs is completely messy. The NCAA has completely screwed the pooch on this one again. They've really made a bunch of mistakes with this with NIL. This is just another consequence of the NCAA trying to run before they learned how to walk and putting themselves in a tough situation. Skip practice Friday after being in practice, the rest of spring, the day before the spring game. That's a bad look. As soon as that news dropped, I knew we were in for some crazy cycle. Did not expect to wake up this morning, though, and see that he was being let go or they were moving on from Tennessee. I think Heupel makes the right decision. There's a lot of rumors going on about a lot of top-tier programs. I know that he would be ineligible to start an SEC program if he transferred right now due to SEC rules, but I think, that may still be on the table. Maybe he goes to an SEC program for a ton of money, sits for a year, or maybe they bring up a lawsuit and maybe they win a potential lawsuit and appeal that. Who knows? Things are continuously changing in this landscape. I think an appeal could potentially win against the conference at this day and age. Who knows what could happen with that? This is a crazy turn of events that has really sort of developed over the last 72 hours. And, if you figured it was a matter of time before somebody thought that they could get more than they were getting at a program and could kind of hold in, because I don't think holdout's the right word. I think hold in is kind of more the term you're looking for here. But Nico's a big-time player. He was, considered a potential Heisman contender last year when he started his first season. People thought he could make a big jump up this year. I wasn't entirely impressed with him the year before. Was wondering what he could look like this year, but now it opens up a ton of questions for Tennessee because their depth chart is very weak. There are a lot of moving pieces here, a lot of things that have to be discussed about Tennessee, about Nico, about all of this. What a crazy 72 hours.
Coming into the season, this was a talent I was very high on, a former top-ranked recruit coming out of Long Beach, California, a guy that, sat for a year in 2023, geared up to be a second-year starter here, and I thought this guy was going to be a very impressive player. I think the despicable thing here is that he just was not that great for Tennessee this past season. We kept waiting for the passing attack to really break out and the offense to kind of look how it did under Hendon Hooker, right? Of course, that was a veteran who had many years of experience under his belt. And at some point, we thought that we'd see that after early season struggles, and they just never did. This passing attack never really seemed to progress like you thought it would. Nico had 9 passing touchdowns in conference play, 4 of those coming in the season finale against Vanderbilt. So he had, 5 touchdowns across conference play the rest of the year, Nick. And, I'd said to you yesterday when it said he skipped practice, I was like, man, this guy really is unlikable. Against Arkansas, they lose the game on 4th and goal. Time runs out where he runs out of bounds, doesn't even throw it to the end zone. And then against Ohio State, they're getting absolutely crushed. They finally score, and he's doing the LeBron silencer. And it's like, and then you see him skip practice, of course. It's like, man, this guy must be incredibly unlikable. And maybe the staff feels the same way. They tried to reach out to him to get him to stay, and they didn't make that attempt last very long, Nick. Doesn't seem like they're on his door, banging, seeing where he's at. Doesn't seem like they're doing any of that at all. So maybe this is just an unlikable player at the same time who is highly talented, but he seems to be overplaying his hand big time.
He might be overplaying his hand. I mean, when you look at the stats, this is not a $4 million a year quarterback. In the game against Ohio State in the playoff, 14 of 31, 45% comp rate, 104 yards passing. Just poor. Yes, he had the 2 rushing touchdowns in garbage time, but just a poor, stat line across the board. Had 2 touchdowns against Mississippi State in a game where he didn't really look even phenomenal in that game. Scored a lot against UTEP and Vanderbilt at the end of the season. Those 8 touchdowns do a lot of heavy lifting in the last 2 games of the season. Didn't look incredible against some of the bad teams on their schedule earlier in the year. Struggled against Arkansas in a loss, obviously. Struggled in a win over Oklahoma where they really got bailed out by their defense. Didn't even look phenomenal against Alabama. Had a 50% comp rate and a pick in that game, in a game that they barely won against an Alabama team that also had, quarterback struggles of their own. This was a tough situation, and I think, I saw someone on Twitter say that Tennessee may be better off, that they found themselves in a situation similar to Alabama last year with Jalen Milroe, where they had an incumbent starter who just wasn't good enough to get them over the top, but they couldn't bench him because he was too good to be benched. Now it kind of frees them from that situation where they can go out and maybe remold this quarterback room, and it could be better off for Tennessee. Nico, obviously an incredibly talented player, but the stats so far just have not played in his favor of making a move like this. I question the advice he's getting, presumably from his father, maybe from an agent or a lawyer, but whoever is advising him, I question their motives behind the scenes. I just don't think it's good enough for the kid, and I think it really is painting himself in a bad situation, making him the villain here when he hasn't earned that right to be the villain.
I agree. I think he's getting bad advice, and I certainly think his father is at the forefront of that. Pure speculation, of course. And he was a first-year starter, so even though the Milroe thing, there's some solid comparison. I don't think it's fully, transparent in that regard. We're going to go ahead and move to some potential destinations. We do want to preface this by saying we don't think that a lot of these teams will be interested at all, and the fit might not even make sense. But we're going to try and spin it the best we can, because at this moment in the cycle, Nick, the pickings are going to be very slim. Even if you're a 5-star top-ranked quarterback, it's not ideal time to move on. Getting things started with Notre Dame. Now, I definitely don't think that Marcus Freeman's going to be willing to add this type of character to his program for all the reasons I just listed that would make him potentially, an unlikable person. But how confident are they in Steve Angeli? This is a guy who came in and led Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl against Penn State when the offense was struggling to a field goal there late in that game when Leonard went out for a little bit. Leonard himself, significantly boosted his stock after a pretty strong season. Remains to be seen what will happen with him on draft day in about a week or two, in about 2 weeks now. But he significantly had a better season I thought he would as a passer. Really, helped boost his character as well. So things worked out for Leonard in that regard. And he also took a visit and got an offer in September 2021 to South Bend. But I don't think Freeman's going to entertain this at all, Nick, and I think Steve Angeli is going to have an opportunity to prove himself as a starter, so I don't anticipate them dipping into the portal for a quarterback, even one of this magnitude.
Yeah, I just don't think this makes a lot of sense for Notre Dame. I mean, maybe it happens. It's one of those programs that has the money to make it pull it off. But I think, like I said, Marcus Freeman prides himself on building a program that is, sort of that group mentality, your teammates first. And this is a guy that's got that anti-teammate vibe where he just seems like a bad teammate for making a move like this. I think Angeli could be a solid starter for this team. I think they could make that work. I think the defense for Notre Dame is still really strong, and the rushing attack is really good for them as well. So I don't think they're as quarterback needy as some other high-level programs. I think what the team is at right now with Angeli could be really solid. Certainly, Nico visited South Bend, so he did, have some interest with that program at some point in his recruitment cycle. So I think that certainly is something to note. They were in his top 12 among the programs he was considering before he ultimately picked Tennessee. I just don't see this one making a lot of sense. It's a big name. It's certainly a flashy name, and that would be a flashy move from Notre Dame. But for me, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I feel like they pride themselves on being a program where it's team first, not player first. And I think a program like Notre Dame, a guy like Nico, just doesn't really fit in right now, given the circumstances that have unfolded here.
Now let's move to the Oregon Ducks. Now there's a lot of reasons why this would make sense for Nico, right? But at this moment in time, it might not make so much sense for Oregon. ESPN's reporting the Ducks are not interested, and they're saying at the beginning of spring, Nico's representatives, in fact, reached out to Oregon to get this whole thing, started, trying to kick the tires on a potential big deal. The Ducks, they're going to contend for national titles for however long he would stay. They have a boatload of money to offer. They'd certainly check his boxes in terms of payment. Great supporting talent. This is a fun scheme to operate out of if you're the quarterback. All those make sense for the player, Nick, but for the team, they currently have an ex-5-star in Dante Moore slated to start, and I don't think that they want to ruin that relationship. That's a guy that also had some, I believe, NIL ties. Remember, he was, I'm pretty sure, committed to Oregon the entire cycle out of high school, flips to UCLA on signing day, went there for a year, wasn't all that impressive, and ended up transferring to Oregon, so NIL's kind of collected in that regard as well. So it seems like they have a lot of time invested in Dante Moore, Nick, and I think it'd be kind of disrespectful. And it really wouldn't make a lot of sense for the progression in this program to try and dip their toes into a Nico experiment. All those reasons, though, that's exactly why his representatives certainly probably did reach out, Nick, and I 100% believe that rumor because it's just too good not to, inquire. I don't think it's going to happen, though.
When you make a move like this where you try to hold out for $4 million, there's only a handful of programs that can pay that type of money, and Oregon would certainly be at the top of the list for many people. This is a program that's got a ton of Nike money coming in. They have a lot of NIL money in general. Besides Nike, they also have more money coming in from the state of Oregon. So it makes a lot of sense. The rumor is that Dan Lanning reached out and let Heupel's coaching staff know that Nico's camp had reached out to Oregon about a potential deal. So that, believe that rumor if you want. ESPN saying the Ducks aren't interested. I also would tend to believe that rumor. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense for Oregon right now for all the reasons that you alluded to there. Dante Moore, I think they have confidence in Dante Moore. I'm not super confident in the X5-star. I question what he could do. I didn't think he looked phenomenal at UCLA, but I think he'd still be a kid that you could develop. And, I feel like when you already have one project 5-star in your camp, why would you add a second project 5-star, right? It just complicates things. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense this late in the cycle. I think Oregon just would really, turn the other cheek there. It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to make this move. I think it's just too much of a gamble for a Ducks program that seems to be in a solid spot, even if you have questions about what Moore can do. I think Moore has a higher ceiling in that setup right now than if you plug in Nico and have to learn the playbook, learn everything, learn the talent around him. I just don't think it makes a whole lot of sense in this moment right now. So I think Oregon's going to take a pass on him. Obviously the money, they're one of the programs that has the money. I just don't think it makes a whole lot of sense in the grand scheme of things for this program right now. It seems like too much of a gamble, and I don't think Dan Lanning takes those type of gambles.
Now we'll look at a return to Los Angeles potentially being in the cards. He's from Downey, California, which is in LA County. Yahoo is reporting USC will not pursue Nico, which is great for me as a USC fan. I think that we're pretty confident in the quarterback room we have, and I think Lincoln Riley's pretty content with it as well with Jade Maeva. And then they just landed a 5-star in Hassan Longstreet. Riley, of course, could work wonders if he sees a vision there. The front office has been red hot this offseason. Of course, Caleb Williams had lucrative deals. If USC wants him, Nick, they would have him, and I think they would beat out everybody else for him for a variety of different factors. Even if there was a bidding war between Oregon as well, I think USC would probably have the upper hand because of that hometown factor. But USC doesn't look like they're going to be interested, Nick. UCLA, on the other hand, their QB room's quite limited. They added a solid starter in Joey Aguilar from App State. Very excited to see how that works out, so I hope they stay packed with him. The Bruins won't compete on a national level in the near term, and the offense isn't exactly loaded with talent, Nick. I definitely think they could scrape some money together. It's probably not going to be what he's asking for at all, but if the pickings are indeed slim, UCLA is going to be at the top of this list.
I think UCLA is certainly a sleeper team in this, discussion. I think they can get the money together, right? I can see that program pulling together the money and making it work. Yes, they're not competing at a national title level right now, but I think you plug in a guy like Nico, that certainly makes your team a lot better, and I think you could build around him and develop him and turn him into a strong player. Yes, I think Joey Aguilar is a solid potential starter for them, but I think Nico is a really talented player. This is a program at UCLA that has money. They're a big market, not too far from where he grew up, LA County, right down the road there. An interesting program that, is always kind of feels like they're on the outside looking in terms of the big programs. This could be a splash move to get them to be that contending level that they aspire to be at. I think the coaching staff is heading in the right direction at UCLA, so I think that could be something they could really work with. USC would make a lot of sense if they were interested, just like Oregon, but again, I don't think USC is interested. That is, all the reasons that you alluded to there make sense to me. If you plugged him at USC, right, he'd be dominant, right? I think Lincoln Riley could turn him into an absolute star, potentially a Heisman winner. But I just don't know if the Trojans want to make that type of move right now. Lincoln Riley knows what he's doing with quarterbacks. He knows what he's doing. I think he's going to look at this and say, I don't want to take on that project. And I think that makes a lot of sense. They have a ton of money in Southern Cal at USC. and they've really built a solid team here, but they have a decent room like you alluded to. They have a solid roster already. I think shaking things up and bringing in a talent like Nico right now, this late in the cycle, just doesn't really fit the MO for USC. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me, but if they want him, they'll go get him. They have the money to do so, but I'm going to trust the rumors that they're not interested.
Now, USC has a lot of momentum of what they've been doing. Lincoln Riley, revamped his staff on the field, and then of course his front office is doing great work. And it seems like a move to go get Nico Nick would really halt that momentum. Doesn't it kind of feel like that to you?
Yeah, I agree. I think they would just be sort of taking a step backwards instead of a step forward. You've built something here with this USC Trojan programs. You have a solid quarterback room. You've aligned your staff. You have your money set the right way. You've put aside money to go out in the portal for next year's cycle and bring in players to compete in 2026. So I don't think you can make a move here and splash and really screw up all your numbers like that on a player that's such a hit or miss move right now at this day and age.
Looking at the final two potential destinations, we'll start with Florida State. These next two are going to be ones that people aren't going to talk about at all, but I think will certainly be in the fold for his services. The biggest issue in Mike Norvell's program is the future at quarterback has just been abysmal. They went out last year, got DJ Uiagalelei, who we thought would be bad, and he was abysmal for him. They went and got Thomas Castellanos, so I think we'll be pretty solid. I think it'll be a good fit in Gus Malzahn's offense, but he did get himself benched last year at Boston College. Jordan Travis, as good as he was also a transfer from Louisville, played numerous years for Florida State. Mike Norvell has no idea what he's doing at quarterback position, it appears, Nick, when it comes to recruiting. They had Luke Kromenhoek, who was a high-end four-star. He ends up transferring out of the program after not being all that great last year, but of course he had no help at all. This is one program that's a major one, Nick, that is just in consistent limbo at the quarterback position. I think Nico, you would assume he would come and be here for 2 years, but obviously with the character issues that we're currently seeing, he thinks he'll probably put up 20 touchdowns and declare for the draft. So who knows? Right now, one and done is the only accomplishments at signal caller for them. Nico might not be the greatest fit in a Malzahn offense, even though he did show he has some capabilities of being a very impressive runner. I think he would do quite well. I think they can provide the compensation. Opportunity to resurrect the school is certainly enticing. But Nico doesn't care about any of that, Nick. He just wants money, so maybe Florida State wouldn't be the best culture fit at all.
Maybe this is one of those programs that does make sense. This is a train wreck program that has a lot of money. They're investing money in their stadium. They're investing money in the transfer portal. And this would be a potential Mike Norvell move. I feel like he makes a lot of moves where he doesn't think about the long-term implications of it, like bringing in DJ last year, which was a total gamble that obviously backfired massively as they had an atrocious season. Nico may look at this and say, I don't want to be involved in this. Maybe this is a situation where the program's interested, but he's not interested. I don't think Gus Malzahn would like to work with a player like Nico that just doesn't really fit his style of coaching. And that could be an issue early on. But FSU has money, right? They could potentially pull up the money. I know they brought in, Castellanos from Boston College, but they may still pony the money up. They would want to bring in a flashy player. They're the type of program that would want to have a flashy big name like Nico. I just don't think he wants to be involved with this train wreck of a program, in my opinion. I think Florida State are still a train wreck, right? I don't think they have any long-term future. Like you said, they don't seem to have any sort of long-term plans at the quarterback position. They seem to be just continuing running back this one-and-done role that is not going to work out. I'm not high on Florida State this year. I don't think this team will be very good at all. Again, I think they have a lot of issues still. I don't think bringing in Malzahn changes anything, and I think Mike Norvell is really running a rudderless ship right now. Bringing in, Nico would be just another crazy chess move that they pull off, and I could so see them doing it because they're a train wreck program. I just don't think Nico's camp will want to get involved, and I think they know better than to get involved with what could be a complete mess in Tallahassee. They're a strange program, but then again, this has been a weird 72 hours, so would it totally shock me if he landed at Florida State? No, it wouldn't, because they have got a lot of money. They could make a move like that. They're not really going to question a guy that has character concerns, in my opinion. They could potentially make a swing at this, and that'd be a crazy move.
Yeah, good points. Completely. Look at the final one here. The BYU Cougars, they actually made Nico's top 12 when he was coming out of high school. This is a team that actually underratedly can offer a lot of money. The boosters came together to put a significant NIL package together for the number one basketball recruit in AJ DeBanza. He is from the state of Utah, but he had significant offers. UNC, Kansas, Duke. He could have went anywhere in the country, and that's usually where you go when you're a basketball recruit, regardless of where you are from. You see it every year, Nick. Guys go from all over the place. Cooper Flagg was from Maine and went to Duke. So that's how that kind of works in the college basketball landscape, because you're typically one and done. So, where you're from, home, staying in hometown, you don't give discounts in college basketball. You know what I mean? Like in football, you're going to be at a program 3 to 4 years and you would like to stay near family. In college hoops, that doesn't exist. Heavily embrace the Polynesian Samoan descent. That's what Nico is. That's his lineage, and that's something at BYU, especially with Kalani Sitake and his staff, that they would embrace from a cultural standpoint. And, it gives BYU a bit of a superstar, in terms of his upside at least, right? And this is a team that can compete for the CFB. They went 11-2 last year. They were on the cusp of making the college football playoff, came up just short. But this is a team that was very good a season ago, Nick. They had 2 losses, one at home to a very stingy Kansas team, and they went on the road and nearly took down Arizona State, who made the CFP and won the conference. This is a really good program, Nick, and I think this is a great fit in terms of cultural standpoint. And I think another point to make is that this is a guy that's going to eventually probably need a bit of a family to kind of come together in terms of a program, because this is going to backfire tremendously, especially when he struggles at his next program. I'm sure at times he's going to struggle. He's going to cost him games, and he's going to get a significant amount of backlash, Nick. And I think Sitake and his program would be great at keeping him right in terms of mentality. This makes sense. BYU does.
This makes sense. Of course, they do have a quarterback currently in their program right now in Jake Retzlaff, who led them last year. So that would be the only reason why I would say maybe they don't make this move, because they do have a starting quarterback who was really good for them last year. Retzlaff was a big revelation for them. He was really solid for them under center and led them to this, strong season there. They're in the top 25. They played really good football all of last year. But a lot of what you're saying makes sense, right? BYU was involved in his high school recruit in the top 12 for a reason. All of those Polynesian links there make sense. Samoa descent, the coach being of that similar type of style. I think that could really benefit well for BYU. And they're one of the programs that have benefited the most from NIL, right? Sneakily, they have benefited the most from NIL across the board, because now with the way that they work with the religious affiliation and all the things going on in Utah, the amount of money going into Utah that has grown as a state. Salt Lake City, Provo, all those cities are really booming right now. The economy is absolutely massive in those states, and it's really benefiting a program like BYU where they can pump money into it. They bring in the top basketball recruit, like you said. They beat out Alabama, which has turned themselves into a basketball program, Duke, Kansas, a lot of those other top schools in the country, by paying him a ton of money. That makes a lot of sense, right? BYU is building something. That team went to the Sweet 16 this past year. They went to the Sweet 16 this past season in college basketball, so they've competed at that level as well. And at college football, they're starting to compete as well. They have a lot of money they can throw around. They can start bringing guys in, and this is a program that can make a gamble here. They can take a shot and take a chance on a guy like Nico, roll the dice a little bit and see what happens. This would be a crazy move. I think a lot of people would not expect it, but people that really pay attention to the ins and outs of college sports and the way that NIL has changed could see this as a clear-cut program that makes a ton of sense. BYU would make a lot of sense. I can certainly understand why they made this list. It makes a ton of sense when you really think about it and break down the numbers.
Look at our final prediction for where he'll go. I'm going to stick with BYU. I think it makes a lot of sense for all those reasons. You're going to take UCLA, Nick, and I think he'll end up at one of these, kind of B-tier programs, I guess you could say. He's not going to end up at a Notre Dame or an Oregon. I don't think that those schools want him. I don't think this is going to work out the way he thinks it is. He's not going to get the money he wants, and he's not going to end up where he wants to go unless he sits out a year to go to an SEC school, which I guess would probably certainly be on the table, because all we care about is money here at the end of the day. I think BYU would check most of the boxes, and if they can kind of try and humble him a little bit, it would certainly take some humility, right, to maybe go to a school like BYU. I think it makes the most sense at the end of the day. You're going to go UCLA, Nick. They're obviously going to fork over a lot of money. It's not really going to put him in the limelight he probably wants at a top program, but obviously he seems kind of conflicted on what he wants, and I don't think that's the play, at a top program potentially. I think he just wants to go wherever the money is, and UCLA probably won't be able to offer the most, but the pickings will be slim here, quite frankly, at the end of the day.
So right now my pick is UCLA. I think they will be able to offer more money than people give them credit for. Big market LA, second biggest market in the country, not too far from where he grew up. That could certainly play into it. This is a program that, they need a marquee player here, and this is a marquee player. I think they could certainly make it work. They could find a way to bring the money together and make this happen. But I also think there's SEC programs potentially involved if he does go the sit and wait route if he takes the money. I think there's 4 SEC programs that I'm thinking of right now that could pony up that money and could make that happen. Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Texas. Those are the 4 teams I look at as potential teams in the SEC. If you want to kind of roll that dice, does Alabama and Georgia make a lot of sense? No, but they have some iffy quarterback situations potentially in the future. Georgia a little bit more concerned than Alabama, but still 2 programs that maybe want to bring in a guy that's more proven for the future. Ole Miss, Kiffin likes to work with the portal. I think they like what they have right now, but Kiffin is the type of guy that would make a move like this. Kiffin would gamble and bring in a player. And then Texas, a lot of questions about whether or not Arch Manning will go after next year. I think he probably stays. Maybe he leaves. It certainly depends on the situation. The Manning camp, they've been known to kind of hold out and play their cards to get the right NFL team. team for their family members to play for. But maybe things change, and a team like the Giants or the Saints or someone like that, Dalton and I were discussing this earlier, are picking early in the draft, picking first overall, and that sort of changes it. And maybe Nico gets a chance to jump in and start at Texas, where the money is certainly big in that program as well. So I think those are 4 SEC programs you want to keep an eye on. Miami in the ACC. I know they just landed Carson Beck, but that's a program you might want to keep an eye on as well. They were involved in his recruitment cycle late in the cycle, as was Alabama and Georgia, 2 top-tier programs in college football. This is an earth-shattering moment, right? This is a game-changing moment in the NIL era. Completely crazy that this has developed and turned into this. It was only a matter of time, but it's still shocking when it does finally happen. He sit out of practice. Tennessee says, we're done, we're moving on, and we're going to see what happens. A lot of question marks about Tennessee. We'll certainly talk about that the rest of the offseason, as they have a tough game week 1 in Atlanta against Syracuse. A lot of question marks about what could be happening there. Maybe he goes to a different program here, but a lot has happened in the last 72 hours. A crazy, crazy week in college football that is only going to get crazier as Nico makes his decision and goes and chases the money. Most likely takes a huge pay raise to go join a different program.
It's going to be it for today's episode. A very big story in college football that has broken over the last couple of days. Very interesting stuff going down. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.